We usually picture crumbling ruins when we think of Roman homes, with shattered walls, missing windows, and lizards scampering over sun-baked mosaic floors. Hey everyone! Today we will talk about the Roman houses that are still inhabited today. But before we start, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos. Let's begin. There are few Roman houses that have never been ruined and are still used for the purpose for which they were originally intended. As we will see, none of them are very reminiscent of the houses in Pompeii that are typically organized around a central courtyard. But despite this, every one of these areas has been continuously or intermittently inhabited for the past roughly 2,000 years. San Gregorio Magno, the future Pope, and Saint Gregory established the San Gregorio Magno Monastery in the year 575. He did so by transforming the ancestral home of his family into a religious community that bore his name, the San Gregorio Magno Monastery. The mansion that Gregory had built was already several centuries old when it was converted into a monastery. It appears to have been a huge complex, with mazes of ruins surrounding its central courtyard and grand reception halls in each of its four corners. It's possible that one of these halls evolved into what is now the cathedral for the monastery. You can see it here. The sole component of the church that can be reliably dated to an earlier time period is a marble throne, which legend has it was occupied by Gregory himself. Even though it's impossible to know for sure whether or not that's accurate, the throne is undeniably old and very well could have been part of the first house. A different section of Gregory's home was eventually converted into the Church of Sant Andrea. The frescoes that can still be seen today were painted in the 17th century. However, behind them, and the medieval frescoes that they covered, the walls of Gregory's mansion continue to stand to the height of the ceiling. Houses dug into the rock in Cappadocia. These days, it's impossible to find a travel brochure that doesn't include Cappadocia. However, at the time of the Romans, this desolate and windswept territory was one of the most secluded parts of the Mediterranean world. If it was known at all, it was renowned for its harsh environment and the cave houses that its residents lived in. The people of Cappadocia had been excavating stables, dwellings, and entire underground cities into the formations of volcanic rock that rose over their settlements for a very long time before the Romans came and controlled the area. Cave churches were initially carved out of the region's spires and fairy chimneys during the late Roman period, which is considered to be the beginning of the golden age of such buildings. Although it is impossible to precisely date some of the cave houses in Cappadocia, there is no doubt that they were constantly occupied from the time of the Romans, all the way up until the 20th century. Houses of the late Roman period in Syria. The Syrian houses during the late Roman period. Our next illustration takes us to the southwesternmost edge of the desert in Syria. Syria is home to some of the world's best preserved Roman houses. In the later years of Roman rule, a prosperous economy in the region led to the establishment of a great number of cities, each of which included streets lined with buildings made of strong stone. The majority of these communities vanished in the 7th century as a direct result of the collapse of the Roman economy in Syria. When the areas around them began to be populated again, many of the Roman houses were in such fine condition that they were simply repurposed. Because there was no wood available in the area, the dwellings in the Hauran in southern Syria have been preserved the best of anywhere in the world. Walls, floors, and roofs were all constructed using thick slabs of volcanic stone. The two examples that are presented here are depicted as they existed in the 19th century, and both of them are still occupied. The examples have been more or less perfectly preserved. Sassy Di Matera. The Sassy Di Matera had emerged as one of the most popular destinations for tourists in southern Italy over the course of the last few decades. They are built within a natural amphitheater of limestone and appear unlike anything else in the country. Row after row of worn stone cottages are erected in the amphitheater. Even though the majority of the masonry that can be seen now dates back to the Middle Ages, the cave homes that are hidden underneath it are considerably older. When the Romans arrived, they were already well into their ancient history. In fact, it's possible that certain people were using it thousands of years before Rome was even built. Individual cave dwellings are very difficult, if not impossible, to date. This is due to the fact that the fundamental design of the caves changed very little over the course of the millennia, while the caves themselves were continuously remodeled and expanded. However, at least a number of them have been occupied in more or less constant fashion ever since the emperors of Rome were in power. Split, Croatia. This mansion served as the Emperor Diocletian's abode during his retirement years. It was an enormous complex that included luxurious reception rooms, massive storehouses, glittering marble temples, and barracks for a large detachment of troops. All of these buildings were surrounded by walls that were high enough and powerful enough to defend a city. People from the surrounding countryside started making their way into the villa almost as soon as the emperors stopped paying visits to it, in the hopes of finding safety from the barbarians behind the enormous walls that surrounded it. By the 7th century, a permanent settlement had been the establishment of a permanent settlement. The town square was formerly the central courtyard of the villa, which is pictured here. Within the walls of the imperial complex, houses were constructed. The enormous cellars were packed with shops, and in a wonderful example of dramatic irony, the mausoleum of Diocletian, who was known as the most zealous persecutor of Christians, was converted into a church. The town prospered and expanded, and it is now a popular tourist site. Visitors come by the thousands each year to view this interesting example of a Roman house that is still inhabited today. That's it for today. What do you think about this discovery? Tell us in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to share and press the bell icon for more regular updates.